Tony D and Little Joan somewhere in the background, and this is a hot take. Now, before I get into this, you know that I've taken 99% of my political stuff and put it on the alternate video channels, the green one, the orange one, and the black one, to try to keep this mostly movies. But unfortunately, I get more viewers here on YouTube. And but if you want to see my why I'm voting for Donald Trump video, you could go to those other channels and watch that video. But so instead of doing that video here, which I think would probably get flagged by the algorithm, I'm going to do a video of why I think you should not vote for Kamala Harris. And because I know there are a lot of people out there who really can't bring themselves to vote for Trump. And look, I didn't vote for Trump in 2016. I voted for the Libertarian candidate. I am still a Libertarian. I'm not a Republican. I consider myself very independent in this realm of politics. Usually people who dive deep into this stuff, I'm a bit of a news junkie, you tend to realize, yeah, everybody's an a-hole, and you get very, very high, you have a very high bar for your political views. So, you could put stuff in the comments if you must about how crazy I am or whatever. But there are just a few sort of basic things that I think you should consider. First, obviously, there are alternative candidates. There is Cornel West, Jill Stein, the Libertarian candidate, I forget his name, and I think there's one or two others. Now, I don't know if they align with your political views, but you should check them out, regardless. You should check them out. I mean, I checked them out at one point. That I don't know their names now is no big deal. I mean, I at least looked at them and considered them. And you should consider them because there is an alternative. You can also write in your own name, write in the name of a friend, write in any name you want as a protest vote. But you might say, why should I do that as a Democrat? Well, I was a Democrat, and I understand your frustration to some extent. But the thing is, you can't get past the fact that Kamala Harris never should have been put in the position of VP. She was appointed for extremely political reasons and ones that have nothing to do with how people voted. If you look at the Democratic primary, Biden came in first, Pete Buttigieg came in second, Kamala was, I think she was almost dead last. I think there were a few other candidates that didn't last as long as her, but Kamala had like one moment and then flamed out in the primary, and no one really liked her. So why is she even VP? I think we all know why she's VP. It has to do with identity politics and the Democrats positioning themselves as, oh, see how wonderful and inclusive we are, and see how terrible Donald Trump is. She has made several horrific statements, I'll say, Kamala Harris has, about the use of power. You can go look these up yourself. One is on truancy in California. She was a prosecutor there, and she bragged about using her prosecutor powers to harass parents and ruin their lives. And I believe she uses those terms, ruin their day at least, by forcing them to get a lawyer, charging them with all sorts of crimes because their son or daughter won't go to school. And while I applaud the sentiment to some degree, I do think parents should be held somewhat responsible for their children. I don't think you should make it a big enough crime to ruin their lives. There may be exceptions to that. There may be some parent who's so negligent that, yeah, maybe jail is appropriate, but to go up and brag uh, on a microphone in public about how you're doing that is extremely tyrannical. There's no other word for it. To brag about how you're using your power to boss people around, that is tyrannical. And note, she didn't say it in the context of, well, yeah, I'm doing this, and look at the truancy rates plummet. No. She said it like, oh, I'm doing it, and they can't stop me. Ha ha ha. Pretty scary. It doesn't denote any sort of compassion for the people dealing with these problems. And you have to have compassion for people, especially when you're in power. Kamala Harris comes from a family whose father is a Marxist economic guy, economic professor. That is the same as saying essentially a communist professor, a guy who believes in Marxism and Marxist economic policies, such as trying to balance the scales. The communists did this all the time, or attempted to, or pretended to, I should say. And the problem with Marxism and communism is very simple. It doesn't work, and it can never work. There will be people who say, well, it can work a little, or, well, it can work under certain circumstances. Well, it just hasn't been instituted well enough. No. Under no circumstances will Marxism or communism ever work. Not partially, not a little bit, not a touch of it. It never works. The reason it never works is because the idea behind it is that everyone's equal. Everyone. Men, women, people who have one leg, people who have mental deficiencies, people who are junkies, people who are criminals, people who are honest, people who are religious. They're all exactly the same. And because of that, they need to have the same money, the same housing, the same food, everything. And it's centrally managed in the government, and the government tells you how much money you get, how much electricity you get, where you live, where you work. They decide it all. You just live your life, and you're supposed to be comfortable. And the people in power are supposed to be so virtuous that when they serve their time, they're supposed to leave and then go work in a field or work in an office or go do something else so other people can serve, because everybody's equal. So everybody should share in that power, and everybody should be doing the same exact things. That system cannot work, because as John Adams, I believe it was Adams, said something like, men are not angels. If they were, we wouldn't need laws, right? So if everybody was virtuous and nice, we wouldn't need laws against murder, because you wouldn't murder anybody, ever. You wouldn't rob anybody, ever. If you were virtuous and nice, communism would work, because you would gladly give up power to anybody else, because they would treat you exactly the same. They would never cheat. They would never get better housing or better food or more money. They would get the same as you. They would live the same middle class, say lower middle class lifestyle. They would live in a modest condo. They wouldn't live in a mansion if they were in charge. And you have everywhere to look in other countries to see that that never works. The people in charge stay in charge forever under these systems, and they award themselves all the money and wealth and food and things that they could possibly want. And they lord it over other people, because once they're in power under a Marxist and communist system, they're impossible to remove. And you might say, well, that's a bit hyperbolic, just because her father's an economic professor of Marxism. He is her father. To dismiss that as having absolutely no effect on the woman, it's insane. And Kamala Harris has, in many, many interviews, talked about the concept of equity. Equity being, making everybody equal at all cost. At all cost. So, whatever advantages you have, the state is forced to say, no, no, you can't have those advantages. Somebody else needs those equal advantages. And if they can't equal it out, well, then you can't have them. It would be the equivalent of going to the DMV every time you had a problem with your money and your life. So imagine going to the government office to say, hey, I had a kid 6 months ago, and I was supposed to get an increase in food rations, and we haven't gotten it, and we're starving. Me and my wife are very hungry. The child we're sacrificing to give it food, but we're having lots of problems here. And the DMV says, well, sir, you're going to have to fill out this form, and maybe in 2 to 8 months, someone might get back to you investigating the problem. No, by that time, we'll be in even worse shape. When you centralize government bureaucracy, your problems just get worse. Because the government is bad at doing a lot of things. Some of the things the government could do, if it was only in charge of a few things, would be efficient. But because Marxism and communism centralizes all the power in the government, thinking that they could do everything, it makes it much, much worse. So Kamala and most Democrats, especially now, lean towards using the government to solve your problem. So, for instance, if your neighbor had some hedges that were too high, and you went to the local Democratic governor or whoever ran your district and said, "Hey, I would like government to do something about my neighbor. His hedges are way too high," and the government, under a democratic sort of system, would come out and say, "Well, as a Democrat, I agree with you. The hedges should only be so high. In fact, I'm going to institute a rule, a town-wide ordinance. And if your hedges are too high, well, you're going to get a fine of $500. And, if you continue to flaunt the law, well, you could go to jail for a week." That's overhanded. And that doesn't really solve the problem anyway. Who knows why your neighbor's hedges are growing too high? You know what would help you? Is maybe go knock on your neighbor's house and say, "Hey, Phil, your hedges are kind of high. You ever going to trim them?" And then he's like, "Well, I'm having lots of problems. Maybe he's getting a divorce or something." And then maybe work it out and say, "Well, I'll come over on Saturday and help you, and together we'll trim your hedges and make them look nice." And then you solve the problem without government. And in fact, people on the right side of politics would tend to lean towards that solution. They would say, "Well, we're not going to get involved with you and your neighbor and his hedges. We don't care that his hedges are too high. You go talk to him yourself and afford a solution." But Democrats tend not to look that way, especially the Democrats of today. Most of the talent in the Democratic Party has left. And you are stuck with a candidate who, by your own primary, is one of the least talented Democrats. If you had Amy Klobuchar up there or Pete Buttigieg, well, you would at least have, I don't agree with them. I think they're all terrible now to me, but at least you would have someone experienced in politics. At least you would have someone who could get through an interview and give speeches and maybe come up with a few policies that, I probably wouldn't agree with, but wouldn't be so onerous as to be impossible to get passed through Congress. Kamala Harris has an idea of sweeping changes that she couldn't possibly manage. So, for instance, giving $25,000 to first-time home buyers doesn't really make any sense when your economy is teetering on the brink. When you can barely afford food and other luxuries, what's the point of offering $25,000 for a house? Like, if you're just struggling with food, like I'm struggling just to afford food these days. Fortunately, I have a lot of friends and family. They just give me food, thank God. Saved me a lot of money. But, getting a house if you can't afford food, you're definitely not in the market for a house. You know, the same thing with the policy of, well, we're going to get rid of all the gas guzzling cars and have everybody drive electric. Well, if you're barely struggling to survive and maybe you got 2 jobs just to have enough food and to keep your place, keep a roof over your head, you're certainly not in the market for a new car, gas or otherwise. And electric cars right now are pretty expensive. On top of the fact that they have problems in the winter, there's not enough free charging stations, a whole host of other issues, which I won't go down that rabbit hole. But these are policies that Democrats support. Why do they support them? A lot of times they just support them because the Republicans were against them and it was a good move politically. You know, Kamala Harris can't push the wind farms enough in New Jersey. Her Democratic colleague, Governor Murphy, is a big fan of it. I think he learned that in Germany, where they instituted a wind farm system, which ended in disaster and ended with them having to tear down some of the turbines to reopen coal mines so they could operate coal plants so people wouldn't freeze to death in the winter. Yeah, sounds like a disaster. Typically, Democrats are terrible at economics. Bill Clinton, you might argue, is an exception, but he was a different kind of leader. He was a guy, he came in at a different time, different kind of leader. Guy could give a speech like nobody's business. He could do an interview all day long. Everybody kind of liked him. He played the saxophone. Almost nobody likes Kamala Harris. I don't even think the people voting for her like her. So you don't have to vote for her, is all I'm saying. You don't have to vote for Donald Trump, although I think you should. But you don't have to vote for her. You don't want to be partially responsible for the disaster she's likely to cause. So if you look at the celebrities and the media and all the people who are shilling for her hard, they are destroying their credibility. I don't know of any Trump supporters, new or old, who will ever look back on the media with any kind of fondness ever again. Same thing in Hollywood. There are a lot of Hollywood celebrities. If Kamala wins, their careers might as well be thrown right onto a fire, because people will be so infuriated that these people shilled for her when the economy goes south, really south, and things get really tough. You think they don't want to go to Disney World now? You think they don't want to watch TV now? Wait until that happens. You're talking about the collapse of many different media industries in the United States. You're talking about, there's already an app. I believe it's called Veebs. The Quartering promoted it. And it's an app designed to look at a product and tell you, the politics of the people making that product. Yeah. And that's going to become an even bigger thing. It's not a very expensive app, but when you're talking about people who are looking for, I won't say revenge, but they are fed up with politics and how they're being treated, that's something they're going to do. And you might say, well, that's not going to affect me. And in fact, Kamala Harris's policies would benefit me and benefit you. And you might point to me as a poor person and say, oh, they're going to benefit you. Yeah, I'm kind of on top of the list for, poor people stuff because I'm pretty poor. But, that's after immigrants and people of color, of course. But, I'm at top of the list, sure, for a while. But all those government systems tend to break down and get overloaded. If you've ever been to a free clinic, and I've been to free clinics, you got to wait in line a long time. And the care is and the cleanliness is And hey, I'm just happy to be at the clinic because it's free. And I might need something, a crutch or whatever. But let me tell you something. Some of the free places scare me a little bit. It's not a great time. It's not a great time to stand in line for an hour and then have the doctor say, listen, he can't see any more people today. I'm sorry. So if you're not really, really sick, if you can hold off until tomorrow, come back early in the morning, you'll be the first one. And I've had that happen. So, and that's going to happen a lot more. The food banks are overloaded now. You know, I know people in my neighborhood, they put out canned goods for anybody who needs them. Those places are usually wiped out of cans now. Now, I'm not that poor, thankfully. Um, but I see them all the time. I walk past them. They're empty now. You put out stuff like that for poor people, it goes like that now. People are hurting. And Kamala Harris hasn't articulated a single policy that makes any sense to me. Now, you might say, well, she's a decent person. I don't know how you say that. This is a woman who slept her way to the top. She slept with a married man named Willie Brown very willingly. This wasn't a forced thing in any way. She was proud to be out on the town with Willie. Had no problems there. She has a husband who has been exposed as a guy who, with his first wife, banged his own nanny and knocked her up. And she married that. Think about that. Think about like what you would have to get past in order to marry a guy like that. You know, that's something messed up in my view. But and you could say all you want all day long that Trump's a bad person, blah blah blah. But look, if you're watching MSNBC, CNN, Fox, ABC, CBS, NBC, all these channels, they all say the same thing. And you might think, well, isn't that proof that the news is correct? Absolutely not. Television is dying. Television is basically dead. The real news is on the internet. It's a mess. There's literally thousands and thousands of channels. You couldn't possibly even watch them all if you wanted to. But you have to really dig to get any kind of information, to find any kind of trusted sources. But the nice thing is, Jesus, my dog. The nice thing is, you can find people on YouTube who seem like honest enough people, who seem like smart enough people that maybe their takes are at least more in tune than yours. And I know it's a hard thing to admit, Democrats, that you've been fooled. Like Thomas Sowell says, it's easy to admit you were wrong in some cases, but it's almost impossible to get somebody to admit they've been fooled. And I admit I was fooled back in the day by Democrats. I was taken in by a lot of the brainwashing. I believed it for the same reasons I think a lot of Democrats who are hanging on by their fingernails believe it today. They want to be good people. They want to help the little guy, and I totally sympathize with that sentiment. But you have to look at a bigger picture. You can't just trust that the media is showing you a guy who, you know, just walked across the border and is really needing help, and man, that's all the immigrants. It's just not true. It's just not true. Many of the immigrants, sure, they need help. There's plenty of countries you can name. I mean, Haiti being one of them. But when the government drops, 20,000 of them in a town of 60,000, there's something very wrong with the government doing that. There's something very wrong. And especially when they do it in Ohio, a red state, when essentially blue staters are controlling the government. There's something very wrong with that. Now, you might look at some of these issues and say, well, I've heard about some of these issues, and according to my news sources, they're overblown. These are Republican talking points and blah, blah, blah. But again, conditioning, brainwashing from these outlets. They're all owned by a small group of huge corporations that have vested interest in the government, in the wars we fight, because they also have holdings in companies that have defense contracts, which are extremely lucrative during wartime. And and Trump is very anti-war. Kamala, we don't know what she is. But it's likely, highly likely, that because the Democratic Party have become what the Republicans were in the Bush era, very regime-oriented, that they're supported by Pineys, they're supported by William Crystal, all the people who love the Iraq War. it's very likely we're going to get more wars with the Kamala Harris. And it's very likely this is part of the reason so many war hawk Republicans and neocons support her as opposed and hate Donald Trump. They hate him. So, the other thing is, too, if you vote for Kamala Harris and she wins, well, that's on you. And your friends may not be very happy about that. You may not be very happy you've brought this on yourself. You're not going to be able to sit back and go, well, geez, I didn't know. When people were screaming at you, this woman is a phony, this woman is terrible, this woman is a communist. You're not going to be able to sit back and go, well, I didn't know. Well, I thought Trump was, going to kill us. I thought he was going to round us up and put us in camps. All that stuff's untrue. Okay? Trump is, and Kamala's not going to collapse the economy on day one. It'll probably take her the whole first term. So look, just consider not voting for Kamala Harris. Just consider it, because at the very least, Trump wins, the economy comes back, you can at least say, well, I didn't vote for Kamala Harris. I didn't vote for Trump, but I didn't vote for Kamala Harris. And you could send a message to the Democrats, and this is probably my most important message to Democrats out there. How will the Democratic Party ever change if they always have your vote? It can't. It cannot change until they suffer a defeat large enough to go, okay, what did we do wrong here? If they continue to win under the circumstances they're winning, they have no reason to stop what they're doing. They have no reason to stop the Ukraine war, which is costing us billions of dollars. They have no reason to stop taking trillions of dollars of taxpayer money and dumping it into the economy and wasting it on recharging stations, which they never built, or internet connections, which never happened, or government subsidies for their cronies. They have no reason to stop. If you think the world is such a great place, go to the grocery store and compare the grocery prices now than to before the pandemic. It's a mess. And if you keep blaming corporations and capitalism, well, I don't know what to tell you. You're already too far gone into the Marxism to make any sense to me. But again, just consider for a moment, if you can't stand Trump, just not voting for Kamala Harris. And maybe you'll eventually get a Democratic Party that's more sensible, that's more populist, that has popular leaders with real ideas, as opposed to a woman who can't seem to get through an interview, even an interview that is supposed to be on CNN helpful to her. The interviewers on CNN and MSNBC and all these places are trying their best to help Kamala Harris. And she still came off looking very odd, awkward, and weird and stupid, while not articulating any real policies other than, we're going to be decent. That doesn't mean anything. Politicians can say that all day long. That's playing on your feelings. That's not talking about a real policy. No tax on tips, that's a policy. No tax on overtime, that's a policy. Eliminating income tax and dumping it on the tariffs, that's a real policy, and one that I highly endorse. And that's all on Trump. That's all Trump. Kamala Harris made copied some of his homework. Do you really think she's going to do that once she gets elected? She didn't promise to do really any of that. She suggested it after Trump did. You think she's really going to do that? I don't think she will. And I think even if she institutes, say, like a no tax on tips, she'll say, well, we're going to put a cap on it at $100. And then, after that, it'll only be 3%. And then after $400, it'll be 8.7%. You could do the math. That's more bureaucracy. That's more bureaucracy. Don't vote for more bureaucracy and centralization. Just vote for someone different. Just don't vote blindly for the other side just because you dislike Trump. Anyhow, that's my message. I hope you're not too angry at me, YouTube. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you in the next one.